The ceasefire negotiations between the US and Iran have broken down, so what happens next? Basically, there are three possible paths, so which one will Trump choose? Of the three, one is to completely defeat Iran, but Trump is really reluctant to take that route. We can clearly see that's the case. So is it because he can't defeat Iran or because he doesn't want to? Do you want to know the real reason behind this? All right, today I'm going to give you an analysis on this topic. Also, on another note, the Chinese Communist Party has announced the schedule for Trump's visit to China, making his visit official. With Trump visiting China while he's stuck on the Iran issue, theoretically, Trump is the one who needs something from the Chinese Communist Party. So when it comes to the Iran issue, will Taiwan become a bargaining chip? This is also a major concern today for our friends from Taiwan and many Chinese friends. So today, Fang Wei will be bringing you an analysis on this topic. Also, the Xi-Trump meeting actually has many different angles worth watching, and I'll be analyzing those for you as well. Welcome to Good Morning America with Fang Wei. Hello to all our YouTube viewers, and greetings to all our listeners on Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. There's quite a bit of news today. If this is your first time here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now. That way you'll get notified whenever there's a new show. And for our longtime subscribers, you can double check to make sure you're still subscribed. Yesterday, Iran rejected the U.S. 14-point ceasefire proposal. The main U.S. goal is pausing Iran's nuclear program. Trump's position is actually a step back, simply requesting a temporary halt. Open the Strait of Hormuz and also maintain the blockade. But Iran said that if they accepted, it would be the same as surrendering. That's their perspective. Why do they see it this way? I'll analyze that for everyone in a bit. Iran also gave the U.S. a 14-point proposal. This included demands such as the U.S. paying war reparations, ending the blockade, lifting sanctions, and unfreezing assets. Iran also insisted on its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, not stopping its nuclear program, specifically that some highly enriched uranium could be diluted and sent to a third country. So how should we view Iran's response? What does everyone think? Basically, it's like telling the U.S. to surrender. That's why, as soon as Trump received it, he immediately rejected it. This happened yesterday afternoon. Then, Trump posted another message on Truth Social. Tang Wen criticized the previous U.S. appeasement policy toward Iran, claiming they'll never laugh again. Here's my analysis. Trump repeatedly negotiated, claiming a deal was close, but it was really just a tactic to force Iran's surrender. His logic? Just give up nuclear weapons. Open up the strait, and I can agree to anything, pretty much, you could say. Let you rebuild, let you restore your national strength, lift the sanctions, and so on and so forth. All of that is possible. In fact, Trump had already retreated to his bottom line, as long as Iran doesn't use nuclear weapons to threaten the world. But then? Iran, on the other hand, has a completely different perspective. For Iran, its overriding priority, meaning what it values most, is something else. It's the survival of its own regime in Iran. If they accept Trump, if they accept those 14 points, which are basically called an agreement, then Iran is actually telling the truth. It would basically be surrendering. Why? Because internally, they would lose the authority to keep all sides in check. For a regime like Iran's, whether you call it a cult or a gang, like the Chinese Communist gang, the Iranian gang is very similar. They don't care about the economy or people's livelihoods. Within the party or the religious group, who gets to hold power? It's whoever is tougher, whoever has the authority. It's as simple as that. So as soon as you show any sign of surrender, it's easy for others within the party to take you out, because power belongs to those who are tough. And as for dealing with the outside world, you lose your leverage to threaten the world, because the only way Iran can stand on equal footing with the rest of the world is by having nuclear weapons. This regime, in the end, is aiming to, how should I put it, take over the whole world. It's a lot like the Chinese Communist Party. They want their brand of extreme Islam to spread across the globe, and to them, every other country is made up of infidels. So this is basically the survival gene of this regime. The reason lies right there. Without nuclear weapons, it simply can't achieve this goal. So whether it's domestically or internationally, it's impossible for them to accept this. So an outcome like this in the negotiations was inevitable, right? I've always said this on the show. There's no way they'll reach an agreement. The positions of both sides, especially Iran, are worlds apart. So moving forward, Trump has three options left. The first option is to keep negotiating and offer new olive branches, trying to tempt the Iranian regime into being moved. The second is a long-term siege. Basically, instead of attacking the city, you surround it. This siege could very likely extend from the sea to the land and even to an air blockade. Because right now, the Chinese Communist Party and Russia have already started providing military aid to Iran. We'll get into those details in a bit. The US hasn't imposed a full blockade on Iran yet, so if they were to do something like that, Trump could try to use a low-cost approach to achieve this. Force Iran to give in, but is that even possible? That's something I'll talk about in a bit. Actually, it's not possible. The third option is to restart the war, go all in and topple the Iranian regime. This would include supporting Crown Prince Pahlavi, but this brings up a question. Why hasn't Trump supported Crown Prince Pahlavi up to now? Let me break it down. I just mentioned three options. The first one is actually not effective and is very hard to pull off, right? Yeah, so if you keep extending an olive branch to them, will there really be negotiations? Iran loves to drag things out, right? The longer they stall, the more political pressure Trump faces, especially as the midterm elections get closer. But if those conditions are put on the table, then obviously it would be a huge weakening of the US position. So it's very hard for Trump to go with that option. The second point seems reasonable, but it's full of difficulties. Why? Because your blockade is targeting Iran, and a key premise of this blockade is, what happens if Iran has nowhere to store its oil? You can't just shut down the oil wells. If you do, the wells might get damaged. But if you don't shut them down, where are you going to store all that oil? So Besson has been waiting to see what Iran will do. What are you going to do? Won't you surrender? What other options do you have? In the end, they just dumped the oil straight into the sea without any psychological burden at all. We all know that 2 patches have already been found. I mentioned the first one to everyone the day before yesterday, and now there's the second one. The first oil field, the oil slick on the sea, covers 75 square kilometers. That's an area of 7 kilometers by 10 kilometers, all covered in oil on the sea. As for the second oil dumping area, it's already been spotted, 65 square kilometers. So since there's a second patch, it definitely means the first one wasn't just an accidental spill. It's that they deliberately dumped oil straight into the sea. As you all know, the Persian Gulf is a relatively enclosed body of water, about 200,000 to 250,000 square kilometers in total, so it's not that big. In such a closed-off sea area, dumping oil into the water has even worse and more far-reaching effects. It not only pollutes plants and fish, but the oil that sinks to the seabed will continue to release toxins over time because oil contains polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These substances are toxins. They can't be broken down. But what's even more urgent than all that is the drinking water for Gulf countries, their daily water supply. The Gulf countries, as a whole, are the most reliant in the world on desalinated seawater. Nearly 50% of the world's seawater desalination capacity is located along the coasts of the Gulf countries in the Persian Gulf. So on average, each country in the Gulf region gets about 60% to 80% of its water, meaning all fresh water, not just drinking water, from the sea through desalination. In the UAE, this figure is as high as 80%, and in Kuwait, it goes up to 90%. Right now, a 75 square kilometer oil slick is drifting toward the UAE. If it reaches there and affects their freshwater extraction, it will immediately cause a major problem. So you see, what Iran is doing here is something that outrages both people and the heavens, yet they seem to have no psychological burden about it. If one slick can reach there, then a second can too, and so can a third, and before you know it, the first 10 or even 20 slicks could all get there. So actually, when it comes to fighting against the Iranian regime or going up against them, you really have to understand this regime thoroughly. Like Sun Tzu's Art of War says, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated in 100 battles, right? That's why Trump's approach to Iran was kind of like the old European knightly spirit, facing off in a fair fight. But when you're up against an opponent who has absolutely none of that knightly spirit, it's a totally different story. All right, now let's talk about the third point. Also, there's talk that Iran is now planning, like I mentioned to everyone yesterday and the day before, that Iran is directly going to take over the undersea cables, not nationalize them, but basically claim them for Iran. All those cables built by other countries, overnight, Iran is saying they belong to them now. If you don't hand them over, they'll just cut them all off. I'll reroute all of them to myself, and if you want to use them, you'll have to pay me every month. That's just how it is, just like the Strait of Hormuz. This is the second thing about the undersea cables. It's basically a whoever occupies the mountain is king kind of approach. So you see, if you try to blockade them, they have plenty of ways to mess with you. Yeah, they can cut the undersea fiber optic communication highways, block the strait, or even dump oil into the sea. They have all kinds of dirty tricks up their sleeve, don't they? That's why, when you try to enforce a blockade, you end up running into all sorts of problems. So with this kind of reasoning, there's only one option left. Why not just topple Iran? Why not use the Crown Prince Pahlavi? As everyone knows, Iran can't be brought down that easily. A lot of people say that even with airstrikes, you can't defeat Iran. Everyone knows that with the combined power of the US and Israel, Israel's military strength, even though it's a small country, is several times that of Iran. And the US is dozens of times stronger than Iran. They could absolutely topple the Iranian regime. I think they could totally do it. The reason they haven't is a matter of choice. They simply don't want to bring it down. Why is that? How should I put it? Let me explain to everyone. First of all, have you noticed that the US hasn't bombed any of Iran's economic infrastructure? Not the oil facilities, bridges, power plants, or even media buildings? They basically left all of Iran's economic infrastructure intact. The facilities that keep things running smoothly, they're deliberately not bombing them. Second, the US doesn't have that kind of support. Take Crown Prince Pahlavi, for example. He's been calling for support all over the world, but even Trump hasn't met with him. He's an American citizen, and even Trump hasn't met with him. It's very clear, even the US doesn't support him. Third, the US isn't arming the Iranian people, right? Trump first said that a shipment of guns was stolen by the Kurds, and he was really unhappy with the Kurds because of that. But the US has more than just one shipment of guns. Why not just send a second or third shipment? But Trump didn't do that either. He deliberately chose not to arm the Iranian people. Why is that? What's behind the Trump administration's thinking here? Actually, it's the lessons learned from history over the past 20 years. It's the failure of nation building. So there are two lessons here. One is when the Trump administration, or rather the US government, invaded Iraq, and the second is the invasion of Afghanistan. After the US military went in, they really did topple the regimes and immediately set up democratic governments, trained local armies, built modern states, including reforming social systems, rewriting their constitutions, and even promoting women's education and Western-style constitutionalism. All of this is what we call nation building, or rebuilding a country. But what was the end result? They failed to establish stable, pro-American democratic countries. Instead, these places fell into prolonged chaos. The worst case was Afghanistan. When the US withdrew in 2021, it was just as embarrassing as the evacuation from Saigon, a complete mess. So for the American people, do you know how much money we spent? On these two countries, we spent $6 to $8 trillion. $6 to $8 trillion. Several thousand American soldiers died, not just a few dozen. Everyone knows that throughout the whole war, American military casualties were about 1 or 200, but during the process of rebuilding these countries, several thousand American soldiers were lost. The war lasted 20 years, and in the end, more and more Americans felt it just wasn't worth it. Among them, a portion of the population, like MAGA, like Trump himself, believed that this kind of thing just wasn't worth it. And there's another issue here. Actually, Afghanistan and Iraq need to be discussed separately because Afghanistan was really tragic. In the end, when they withdrew in such a messy way, they lost everything. Back then, they went in to fight what was called Al-Qaeda. And then, along the way, they also took down the Taliban, who were harboring and supporting Al-Qaeda. But now, everything has gone back to how it was. The Taliban are ruling Afghanistan again. Iraq, on the other hand, is actually quite different. In Iraq, after the US military went in, they toppled the authoritarian government, right? They took down Saddam Hussein, but that ended up creating a power vacuum because they disbanded all of Saddam Hussein's military and police forces. With nothing else to do, the only thing those people knew was how to fight, so they joined forces with terrorist organizations. That led to the rise of ISIS, who went on to seize cities and territories. At one point, they even took over half of Iraq. So the lesson Trump learned from this was that you can't create a power vacuum. You have to maintain the current strong government in power. They just want him to be pro-American. So the experiences of these two countries have left them once bitten, twice shy. Even 10 years later, they're still wary. You know, that's kind of the situation. So in this context, why not support Crown Prince Pahlavi? Because from the perspective of the US government, Crown Prince Pahlavi doesn't have any real military power. He has no foundation within the country, and he's just a symbolic figure, a representative of an opposition that could potentially emerge, nothing more. So if you prop up a puppet, if you support someone like that, and this person turns out to be a puppet who can't stand on his own, in the end, he'll just become a burden for the United States, a liability. So does all of this make sense? It does, right? If you ask me, I don't agree. I think that's wrong. Those perceptions are incorrect. Why? Because there are successful examples of rebuilding countries. After World War II, rebuilding Europe and Japan was a success. So why was that successful, but this one isn't? So whether a reconstruction can succeed or whether chaos will break out is closely related to the national character and culture of that country. Japan, for example, was able to rebuild successfully. Germany was able to rebuild successfully, but Afghanistan couldn't. So what about Iran? Is Iran like Afghanistan? Or is Iran more like Japan or Germany? I don't know how everyone sees this issue. Let me tell you, in my view, it's very clear. Iran is definitely not like Afghanistan. On the contrary, Iran is more like Japan. A country like that. We need to be aware of a common misconception. Iran is not an Arab country. In the 6th and 16th centuries AD, Iran was invaded and occupied by Arab countries, but Iran is unique. Even after being occupied for hundreds of years, over more than 2,000 years, Iran was still able to preserve almost all of its Persian traditions and culture. Not only did it preserve them, but Persian culture was able to spread and re-emerge throughout the Middle East, even influencing Arab countries. So Iranian culture has a sense of wholeness, and in fact, it's quite similar to Chinese culture. It's ancient, rich in substance, and has a strong sense of identity and self-respect. That's why, if Iran were to return power to its people, the country wouldn't fall into chaos. At least, that's my view. Based on all my analysis, I don't think Iran would descend into internal turmoil. So after 47 years, the Iranian people are truly looking forward to welcoming the liberating forces. That's really their attitude. It's completely different from what happened in Afghanistan or Iraq, where they were attacked and didn't even know which way was up. Overnight, the US military appeared right in front of them, and people were left confused and manipulated. They would say things like, the American imperialists are coming in, we have to fight them, our Islamic faith is completely incompatible with theirs, we can't coexist, and so on. But Iran isn't like that. You know, it's hard to even say that Islam is truly the state religion of Iran. They have their own Zoroastrianism, their own religion. It's just that they've been occupied for a long time. Not just a long time, but for hundreds of years. Yet they've still managed to preserve their Persian traditions. This is a people with their own culture and ethnicity, and they're also a very wise nation. Iranians are smart, as is well known. Many impressive, intelligent Americans are in Iran. Pahlavi was a viable option the US should have considered. If issues arose during assessment, they could simply move on. Pahlavi grew up in the United States as the crown prince, receiving an American education. If he could be used, he would be a prince from the previous dynasty who could revive a dying legacy. His spiritual appeal would be extremely powerful. Given Iran's current situation, as long as there's a spiritual leader, that's enough to unite people from all directions. If you think about it from China's perspective, once you raise a banner, everyone will rally around it. Actually, do you remember how the Cold War ended? It was just two people, right? One was Reagan. Reagan openly said, I support you all, win your freedom. The second was Pope John Paul II. Wasn't that enough? Did these two people have any real foundation in Eastern Europe or the Soviet Union? Did they have armies? Did they have a lot of organizations or groups supporting them? No, they didn't. Because regions like that were just waiting for change. They were always waiting for a catalyst for transformation. So with just John Paul II and Reagan, that was enough. That's why they were able to bring an end to communism themselves. So all of this, I think, is a very profound matter. It really involves understanding the country of Iran. If you truly understand this country, you'll realize that Iran is different from Afghanistan and Iraq. In fact, even today, Iraq and Afghanistan are not the same as each other. Afghanistan really is a total mess. Honestly, it's just gone back to how it was before, and all the effort was for nothing. You know, Iraq now has order in all aspects of society. Even though it's not exactly pro-America, at least this country is definitely not a threat to the United States anymore, so your reconstruction actually did have some effect. Of course, I'm not suggesting that the US should throw another $3 trillion of its own money into rebuilding Iran. Right now, what the US really needs to do, in my opinion, by the way, if this show of mine ever gets translated into English and goes out there, if it spreads, what the US should do is have Trump bring together Americans and Iranians living overseas and work with them to find answers. They're the ones who actually have the answers. Because in Western countries, in Europe, North America, Canada, and Australia combined, there are about 4 to 6 million Iranians. In the US alone, there are 600,000 to 1 million Iranians. Their intelligence, their deep understanding of their own country, the contributions they can make, they're all eagerly waiting for change. So actually, the US has access to a tremendous force. There's no need to only deal with the Iranian regime. So what I'm trying to say is that if you want to resolve the Iran issue, there's actually a third way. Trump today is unwilling. He doesn't want to destroy the country. Even if he were to take down the Iranian regime, or if the Iranian people were to overthrow the regime, or even if they couldn't, he still doesn't want to ruin Iran's economy and people's livelihoods because he believes that's just too important. Trump really is someone who speaks harshly but has a soft heart. He has this charitable heart. Right, so that's why he won't destroy it. It's because of this reason. It's not that he can't destroy those things. He really could wipe them out overnight if he wanted to. So he keeps saying that he hasn't done it. But now, I think with a theocratic regime like Iran, such an evil regime, if you don't bring it down, it will always cause trouble for you. As for its nuclear ambitions, it will never give them up. So the only option is to bring it down. And the way to do that is to work together with the Iranian people. There are millions of such people living overseas alone. So in short, this is a test of Trump's wisdom because Trump and his group are really just ordinary people, right? They came in with a very fresh point of view without any political baggage. So he really does have a very relaxed, upbeat, and highly efficient side. But when it comes to international affairs like this, I think there still needs to be a process of understanding and recognition. That's how I see it. So this matter really is a test for Trump, a test for the Trump administration. First, let me talk about two recent related developments. The U.S. Air Force has just carried out large-scale airlifts over Europe, transporting supplies to the Middle East. As an independent entity, you could call it. If you look at it through an aviation monitoring network, it's very clear. So the U.S. is redeploying its military forces. In addition, just last night, there was news that an Ohio-class submarine, a nuclear submarine, the USS Alaska, entered the Strait of Gibraltar. It surfaced in public view and was photographed by people there. Why did it do this? It was intentional, because the Alaska, this is a ballistic missile nuclear submarine. It's not like a regular guided missile destroyer carrying Tomahawk missiles. It carries nuclear missiles, ballistic nuclear missiles. So in the past 25 years, this kind of nuclear submarine has only surfaced 3 times. This is the 3rd time. There were only 2 times before. So the message here is very clear. This is a show of force, obviously. It's about showing military strength, so let's see what happens next, which path things will take. There are different ways this could go. How to proceed is indeed a tough problem for the Trump administration, and it's also a challenge for the whole world. So what exactly will he do? Well, let's just wait and see. All right, so of course, my analysis is a bit different from typical political commentary. If you agree with my analysis, please give it a like, okay? Also, share this program with more people. I believe that if an idea is good, it deserves to be spread. By sharing it, I think you also become a part of this. Now, just by giving it a like and moving your finger, you can help push this video to more people through the algorithm. All these actions will prompt YouTube to recommend this program to a wider audience. Yes, I really do believe what I'm saying is correct. Of course, it might not necessarily be absolutely right. If you have a different opinion, you're welcome to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Before Trump visits China, let me first talk about Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. In a very unique statement yesterday, he said on CBS's 60 Minutes that he hopes Israel can completely give up the financial support the United States provides for military cooperation within 10 years. What does this mean? As everyone knows, the United States has long supported and aided Israel, and this includes 2 things: weapons and funding. Every year, the U.S. provides Israel with $3.8 billion, and this funding is very important. Israel's national defense budget is only about $30 to $40 billion a year. In some years, it's even less than $30 billion, so $3.8 billion is more than 1/10 of that. Netanyahu said, "We don't want it anymore. We don't want it." The host was really surprised and asked, "You don't want it? When did you decide that?" Netanyahu replied, "We're starting now. We'll finish within 10 years. That means after 10 years, we won't be taking the $3.8 billion from the U.S. anymore." He said, "I don't want to wait for the next Congress. We're starting right now." When he said this to his people, everyone was stunned, like, huh? What's going on? You're turning down free money? Why? So some media reports and analyses say that the Israeli prime minister is very familiar with American politics, understands it well, and knows that U.S. support for Israel is weakening. According to the latest survey from the Pew Research Center, 60% of American adults say they support Israel. Today, they hold a negative view. And this percentage has increased by nearly 20 points in just 4 years, going from a minority to a majority. The main reason for this poll result is the portrayal of the Israeli military during the Gaza war. So, seeing this trend, he suggested not taking America's money. I don't think so. I disagree with that view, because this aid is appropriated by Congress. The president carries it out, and it's a consensus between Congress and the executive branch of the US government. Right now, there's no controversy over this appropriation. No one has come out and said that the US can't give this money. This was something Netanyahu brought up on his own. Why did he say it? Let me share my reasoning, and everyone can judge for themselves if it makes sense. The reason he brought this up is actually pretty simple. He's very clever. He just wants to tell Trump, I don't want to take advantage of you. We'll rely on ourselves, because he knows that fairness is what Trump values most. Trump is a businessman, so Netanyahu knows exactly how Trump thinks. That's why he took the initiative to tell Trump this, or to announce to the US that they'll handle their own affairs. He wants the US to help in other ways, like with equipment and military cooperation. Help us in all sorts of ways, but we won't just take your money for nothing. This way it eases the burden on the Trump administration. By taking a step back to move forward, they actually gain an even stronger partnership and cooperation with the US government. That's my opinion. Of course, whether American public support for Israel is really declining, well, that does seem to be the case, and it's truly unfortunate. Because in my view, Israel is like a little America in the Middle East, and as for Netanyahu, he attributes the damage to Israel's reputation basically to the influence of social media. He says this is actually the eighth front in the war, the front on social media. Because on social media, there are constant portrayals of how cruel the Israeli military is, how they attack civilians, and so on. He insists that's simply not true. They are very careful to protect civilians. However, all this propaganda is being taken in by young people who are heavily influenced by social media. So on social media, there are people deliberately steering the narrative. Let me give you an example. It's like during the Chinese Civil War, when the Communist Party, in addition to fighting on the front lines, also had a second front behind enemy lines. That front was the battle for public opinion. So even before they won the battle on the front lines, they had already won the battle for public opinion. Actually, the Vietnam War in the US was similar. The war was largely lost on the home front before it was lost on the battlefield in Vietnam. So, in my view, governments like the US or Israel are normal governments. They don't have propaganda departments. They don't fight or engage in battles for public opinion. Trump was already basically a media personality and businessman who became president, and he was very good at using the White House press conferences, that's all. But he didn't wage a battle for public opinion either, because he didn't have that capability. In fact, the US government isn't allowed to control the media or run media outlets. Voice of America is an exception. The US government can't run media outlets domestically. Okay, so basically it's like a front line. When others attack on this front, they're on the offensive, while you're not even defending. What can you do if you want to fight back? This is the inherent disadvantage between a normal government and a communist regime. They'll stop at nothing. To put it bluntly, it's a kind of unrestricted warfare. But on this side, the government just won't do those things. So honestly, it's like you're naturally set up to lose. I think Israel is in the same situation. That's my personal opinion. What do you think? If you agree, give it a like. If you don't, that's fine too.